Okay, I want to welcome you all to the Canvassing Training Program. My name is Diane Neville. I'm the chair of LD10, and this is the second in a series of programs aimed to give training suggestions to new or existing PCs. Because sometimes we just need a little refresher on, oh, we're supposed to do this, or this is a good idea. This is sponsored by the Pima County Democratic Party. And today it's all about canvassing. And a lot of times when we think of canvassing, it's simply at election time, which is coming right up, where you know you're going to go knocking on doors or you're calling voters to get them to cast their ballot. But you know, it's a lot more than that. It's a year-round activity that Jackie Bauer and Marcy Albert, who are PCs and LD10, have really taken to the next level. I was amazed at some of the things that they've been doing, and it really got me enthusiastic. And I just wanted to share what they're doing with all of you. Okay, so I'm going to start with Jackie.
Great. And just a quick intro. I'm a fairly recent transplant to Tucson. I moved there early 2018. And from Indiana. I was thrilled to move to a swing state after having lived in a solid red state for 20 years. So Arizona has been very exciting, and it's so much easier to get excited about politics in a place where things might shift. So, I mean, for you guys who've been there forever and ever, thank you for all the groundwork you laid on getting Arizona shifting in the right direction. And I will say, Marcy can introduce herself. So I think Marcy's been in Arizona a lot longer than I have, but I will say, I want to sort of frame everything that we're going to talk about in how valuable it's been and how easy it's made voter outreach to find a partner that I really, really love working with. And so Marcy and I Mike might have introduced us, but it's been so wonderful to have someone I can work with sort of reliably and reach out. So all of this is prefaced by saying, find somebody who really is excited about doing stuff too, if you can. So, and Marcy, I don't know, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I will. Unlike Jackie, I've moved to Tucson in 1979 for graduate school and fell in love with Tucson. There's nowhere else I would rather live. So, and I can only reinforce what Jackie said. It's been wonderful for me when I met her as another PC in '82 to find someone who was so enthusiastic, had some great ideas, and made it fun to canvass. And I can't really say that that was my framework. I would not have put canvass and fun in the same sentence before, but I honestly do put it in the same sentence now. And I think that's part of connecting with Jackie, sharing the same enthusiasm, and then starting to see how some of that canvassing is paying off. So
yeah,
been great.
So with that, I'll go ahead and jump into the slides we put together. And here you go. Can everybody see that all right?
Yes.
Okay. And I do want to encourage you. I mean, we're a medium-sized group, so I think jumping in and if you have questions, you can raise your hand, I think, or maybe put questions in the chat. So anyway, Marcy and Diane and Miranda, if you can help me monitor that, that would be great. Anyway, so what we're going to talk about is relationship-based voter outreach. So an approach to voter outreach that really focuses on developing a connection with the people that you are reaching out to, rather than having sort of transactional relationships or transactional interactions that are just focused around elections. So I want to start with a question, and if people want to either speak up or put words or ideas in the chat, I would love to hear what you think of when you think about canvassing. What does that evoke for you, or what's your reaction when you're asked to canvass or know you're going to be going out on a canvass? That's great. Putting a face to the party. think Eric has a raised hand. Eric, I think you can talk.
Yeah, this may sound a little bit like pandering to your point, Jackie, with the relationship based, but my background is in sales and marketing, and I very much have, and I think like most people do, quite negative associations with direct canvassing as a purely transactional activity. It carries with it a ton of unpleasantry. So I applaud the notion that it's more relationship based. I just became a PC, and one of the things that I've already heard that I find powerful is to be a resource as opposed to a conduit for voting, and so I that's my take real quick.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but that viewing yourself as a resource and viewing this as an opportunity to sort of bring value to people, I think is incredibly powerful. So, and then others have said in the chat, lots of phone work, right? So we're working on the phone, we're working texting, in person, all of these different ways. I like to see how many people are at home or answer the door. It's true, right? Because I think some of us don't like to canvass and some of us don't like to be canvassed. So you never really know what's going to happen there. Talking one-on-one. So this is an opportunity to sort of really connect with people. I am scared. I get nervous. I totally get that. Even though I like it at this point in the way that we do it. I still get a little nervous when I'm actually out there, and it takes a few knocks to get over that. Much better than phoning. Okay, so somebody likes it better than actually just calling people or texting people. Talking face to face. I hate doing phone calls. Hot and difficult. That is so true in Tucson, especially right now. So yeah, those are all really great. Oh, I love texting. I love texting for all forms of communication, to be honest. It's my go-to form of communication. So that's great. And that really captures sort of my thoughts on canvassing as well. A second, there we go. So typical voter outreach, and this is common everywhere. This is not by any means a local description, but we tend to fall into these habits that emphasize quantity over quality. So we track door knocks, we track literature dropped, we track maybe the number of texts sent or the number of calls made or the number of people we speak to. Without necessarily linking those activities to outcomes and really understanding voters. And I think this really hit me in 2018, where I was canvassing in Tucson, really wanted to help whatever way I could in this new city, in this new purple state I've moved to, in whatever way I could. And I couldn't get over the feeling that I wanted to trust what I was being told was the best use of my time, but it just didn't feel like it. I felt like I was knocking on these doors where there were 5 other pieces of literature just sitting there untouched. I was talking to people who said 4 other people had already knocked on the door. I was being given literature that felt useless to me. It was a picture of a candidate and maybe a nice comment about their family and what they used to do. And I don't mean to sound disparaging about these forms of outreach, but to me as a volunteer, it really felt superficial. I was going to neighborhoods I had never been to before. I remember knocking on the door of a man who said that he wasn't planning to vote. He was registered Dem. He didn't remember having registered. He couldn't think of a reason to vote. And I stood there thinking to myself, this was a person living in lower income housing, how I was so ill prepared to talk to this person about anything that meant something to him. And after 2018, it sort of hit a point with me where I wanted to find a different way of approaching people. So I managed to find an organization called the Arizona Ground Game. I was introduced to them through, I'm not even sure, I think it was serendipity or the stars aligning or whatever, but found this organization that had really started to emphasize something called relationship-based voter outreach or communication. So this approach it really emphasizes relationships. We have the same person working on the same list of voters in the same neighborhood over time, instead of having random new volunteers sort of popping into these neighborhoods 6 weeks before an election to try to get people to mobilize. It is ongoing. The idea is that you build these relationships over time and remain kind of a steady source of information as they're dealing with not just elections, but the public sort of process over time. Oops, sorry. Quality over quantity. So again, relationship-based, building information and helping people be familiar with you as a person, as well as you being familiar with them as a person. And then I really like the idea of adding value to the voter. Like, what can I convey that helps them see how the public process relates to their life, that helps them participate more easily, that helps them sort of solve a problem that may not be otherwise really clear to them, giving them insights that aren't totally obvious. So TAG calls this, so TAG is the Arizona Ground Game, calls this the defined neighborhood approach. So effectively, and this can be done a lot of different ways, but this is kind of the way we've approached it. But volunteers effectively adopt a list of 40 to 60 voters. Usually it's in their own neighborhood, but it doesn't have to be. It could be that you want to target a particular area that you're interested in, or somewhere you have a relationship to, or just somewhere where you know a lot of people, or something like that. But the idea is that regardless of where it is in relationship to where you live, you are the person that sort of ends up interacting with those voters the most. The way we approach it too is to share all of the voters in the area, not just the Ds, not just the independent, or not the Ds and the independents, but some people registered for all parties, so that people know what the context is. You know, do we have a D who lives in a neighborhood that's all ours? Do we have a D who lives in a household of all ours? So it's really trying to figure out like what's their local and domestic context. Oops. So the idea is with this, again, is to become a resource to folks. So how do we bring value to them, not just around elections, but around a local issue, around a voter initiative that's taking place, around some issue that's affecting perhaps their neighborhood specifically. So trying to sort of emphasize all those different things that help us understand the neighborhood, the people, the families, as well as us sharing information about elections. This approach relies on many types of outreach. So I think when you have a relationship with the voters, it becomes more meaningful when you are the one texting or when you are the one calling, rather than maybe that feeling like not as high quality of a contact, because you're relying on these multiple ways of communicating with people. All forms of communication become a little more meaningful. And those volunteers, so this is sort of the long-term view, you know, if we develop a good set of volunteers who take this approach all over Pima County and all over Arizona, then we can use those volunteers who are so familiar with those areas as the sort of first point of contact when we do outreach in those areas. So ideally you have a person who's sort of aware that, oh, this campaign will be here, this campaign will be here, that can kind of help make those outreach efforts more effective. So TAG has used this approach really, I think, since 2016, but these are the results of one particular precinct where TAG volunteers focused. So on the left is non-voters in 2014. So these are two midterm elections compared side by side. So in 2014, all those red dots were people who did not vote in that election. And on the right, in 2018, after 2 or 4 years of TAG volunteers focusing on this relationship-based outreach, that is how many non-voters there were. So big impact on just this single precinct. And I see somebody just posted in the chat, you need to understand the voters you are reaching, their community, and the needs of the community. So that's exactly right. So the goals of this type of outreach is to get those voters. So by building these relationships, we start to get those voters to understand how the public process affects them, how elections affect them, and the policies that result from those elections affect them, getting them to vote down the ballot. So starting to see this is how these locally based offices affect, these very real policies that come out. This is what the Corporation Commission does, or this is what my state legislator does. So getting them to vote all the way down the ballot, which is a real challenge. Seeing elections as a means to an end, seeing a way to change policies, a way to sort of address things that might be happening in their own neighborhood or with their own family. And also getting them more informed about how do you interface with public processes? How do you engage civically? And I think all of this can be part of having a real face, having sort of a personal link to the election process. And yeah, Nancy points out that 2014, between 2014 and 2018, the stakes changed in a major way. And that is absolutely true, that people were, after what happened in 2016, absolutely very much ready to change or to tackle, to participate in a different way. So that certainly helped, but that one-on-one interaction, I think, is really critical.
Jackie?
I'm going to say something.
Yes, it's Diane. Can you explain what TAG is? Because a lot of people really don't know.
Yeah. So thank you. The Arizona Ground Game is a sort of volunteer-based public policy and voter education organization that was founded in 2016. And this is before my time, but it was founded in 2016 after the sort of devastating blow of the 2016 presidential election, really focused on trying to find better ways to connect with voters, to make these interactions less transactional and less sort of election focused and more about responding to people's needs and interests. I serve on the steering committee. There's about 10 of us who kind of run the organization to the extent that's possible, but we just work really closely together and focus on outreach on all kinds of different issues, from running voter forums to sort of help people understand the specific issues to we worked together to on all the petition initiatives that just wrapped up. So really trying to get people mobilized around those petition things. So our whole idea is to focus on Arizona, to really in 2018 or in 2020 rather, we focused on LD 11 to really try to mobilize that LD in the right direction. So it's a very local organization focused on voter engagement. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. Thank you for that question. So back to the goals of this relationship-based canvassing. So we're really trying to increase the number of left-leaning 4x4s or high efficacy voters who actually, we want to see those numbers increase. We want more and more people to actually hit that 4x4 number. We want more independence. So like I said, we focus on Ds, on independence. We really try to expand, to shift Arizona. We've really got to, and sorry, what's a 4x4? A 4x4 is someone who's voted in every one of the last 4 elections and primaries. Is that an accurate description? So someone who votes in every election.
Yes, I call them super voters.
Super voters, right.
Yeah, my super voters.
Yeah. So the people we really, we want more of those people. We want to see more of those people who've been active in everything, every chance they've got. But we also want independents. Well, I'll talk a little bit more about independents later, but independents tend to be less engaged with politics. But we want more of our left-leaning independents to engage on a routine basis, whether they want to identify as a D or not. We want to start getting them more engaged because that's so critical in kind of continuing to shift Arizona in the right direction. And then finally, helping us identify more people who can contribute to this network of relationship-based voter outreach volunteers. So we really want to see this as an opportunity to build a network that covers, ideally, someday, every single precinct in the whole city. And that's a challenge. Like I don't deny that that vision is highly aspirational, but I think that's what we need, aspirations. So what does this look like? It starts with getting that list of voters. So you get your sort of assigned list of voters that are yours to adopt in a way. And I think Marcy and I have kind of taken this approach in in precinct 82, where we've got our list of all the voters in the precinct, and we do regular outreach along, on these same streets. Our goal eventually is to touch every one of those voters at least once a quarter. But the idea is that you have that list and you know who the people are, and you're sort of monitoring new people as they come in, or people as they move out. Aiming for 3 touches a year. So you want to be something they see consistently, and that happens even if there's not a major election. And those 3 touches may escalate if you have an election, in the near future. So, but the idea is that you don't drop all communication when there's not an election happening. Back again to providing value, and I will go into some ideas in a little bit. Getting your packet updated, monitoring the changes, welcoming new voters, maybe young people who register to vote for the first time, and so on. And then actually keeping notes on these folks. So I've had conversations. I had a man call me in 2020 who it sounded like he had not been an active voter, really wanted to make sure he voted, but had a question and was shocked when I picked up the phone to talk to him. So he and I made a note of that and what we talked about and what his questions were, what his concerns were. So you have this opportunity to sort of track stuff over time. And I just think that's really powerful. Eric's asking, are these attempts or confirmed? To me, you're relying on, and I'll talk a little bit about what a touch is, but you're relying on so many forms of communication that for most people, it's effectively an attempt, right? So you're dropping a note or making a call or sending a text. Most people don't respond, right? And that's typical of virtually all kinds of outreach that we do. But, when there's a reason to, or, when you're knocking on doors, that's an attempt to or that's an opportunity to have more of a real interaction. And the idea is that the more people see your name or are familiar with whatever the font you use when you drop something off at their door, whatever it is, that your actual confirmed touches start to increase. So that's a long answer, but touches may or may not be confirmed, if that's helpful. Larry asks, what records do we maintain in Van or outside of Van? This is a great question. We started with a great list of PDF of all the voters in our precinct that Mike Weingarten shared with us, and it literally is just a completely marked up copy of that document. And now that we have access to the Van and access to the LD10 database, I am starting to record this stuff in the LD10 database or the Van. I guess it depends a little bit on the context when we're doing outreach. But yes, I wish we had access to that online earlier on, because now the thought of trying to transfer all my notes into the database seems like a real challenge. So let me carry on, and please do, if I need to slow down or if anyone has a question, this is great, folks asking questions, but please let me know if I need to review anything. And shouldn't you ID your voters via local LD? I don't know if I understand that question. Larry, can you clarify?
Well, what you've got is get a list from PCDP, and I think if they went through their local LD, that same information is available.
Oh, great. Thank you for that clarification. Yeah, that completely makes sense. That it's not the county party that's sharing, it's the LD. Thank you. So a touch, I think, is kind of anything you want it to be. Marcy and I have sort of thrown around all kinds of ideas that we haven't necessarily followed through with yet, in part because of the pandemic. But I think you have I think creativity is good here. So I like the idea of introducing yourself, and this can be, I put together just a little blurb that said, hi, I'm your neighbor. This is where I live. This is my phone number. Here's what I'm interested in. And I'm just saying hi. I did that when I first started reaching out in my own neighborhood. You can share as much contact info as you like. I put my phone and my email, but I understand, you know, not everyone may be uncomfortable with that level of detail. And yeah, Eric, your question about it's per precinct. Ideally, I mean, Marcy and I have found that just with the two of us trying to do outreach to all our voters in our precinct, it's more than we can probably handle. And our goal is to keep recruiting volunteers. So we've managed to get a couple of new people involved who help us with outreach on specific streets. And my hope would be eventually we can get them to do that outreach consistently over time. So my hope is to keep building that network. So maybe we've got 10 people who are all working in precinct 82, but all that's going to take time, right? Oh, sorry. I meant the packets are within a given precinct. Yes, that is right. Yeah. So our ideal would be, we do have a packet that's our entire precinct, but it's too much for one. I think we have 1,000 Ds in our precinct, so it's a lot. And Elizabeth asked, how do you identify new voters? I think the party or the LD is working on this on routinely letting the PCs know who new voters are as they register. And I think that maybe the goal, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, the goal is to maybe have that happen once a quarter or a couple times a year. Okay. Anyway, so I like introducing yourself, sort of making sure people know that you are going to be having an ongoing relationship with their neighborhood, whether you live there or not. Newsletters, and I'll show you some examples of these, but newsletters, cards and postcards, texts and calls. I mean, we've used all of these things to reach out to people, voters in our neighborhood and in our precinct. I like trying to do face-to-face. Again, with pandemic, we weren't really knocking on doors, but the petitions are such a nice opportunity to have a reason to go and talk to someone one-on-one, to say, I've got the Stop Dark Money petition. I want to, you know, we're trying to get as many signatures as we can. You know, I'm planning to stop by Saturday morning, you know, is that a good time? Or, you know, whatever, however you want to approach it, but you finding reasons to sort of interact with people and not just stopping by to say hi. But I think it's really up to you. And then we've looked at, you know, part of our precinct, it's neighborhoods that perhaps don't feel like they get as much attention from the city for concerns like, you know, sidewalks that are uneven, or, you know, they don't have trees planted. So Marcy and I have been trying to brainstorm, you know, are there things we could do that would engage the neighborhood in a sort of beautification of their area of the neighborhood, or something where we could, you know, bring city resources to them, again, to kind of try to link public processes and civic engagement to positive outcomes that affect their life on a day-to-day basis. Instead of, you know, so many of the issues we're talking about are so big for so many people, and, you know, being able to bring it down to their neighborhood, their family, you know, the issues they're concerned about, I think is really powerful. Larry asked, where do you find content for newsletters? I'm going to show you a couple, and then, you know, these are examples that were during the legislative session in 2021 or during the during election outreach. So this is the first one. And we're going to make all this info available. I mean, I think our ideal would be to have a sort of a shared Dropbox where people can load up, you know, put images or outreach or whatever they do into those shared drives, and we can kind of learn from each other. But this, I, again, was trying to think, how can I bring value to people? How can I help them link to things that might be of most concern to them in a timely way, in a way that gives them action that they can take. So this was my attempt to help people engage more with what the legislature was doing last session. I feel like the closer the Arizona legislature has gotten to being a 50-50 split, the crazier it's become. And I think it's really helpful for people to see, what exactly are we talking about? How could this affect issues that I really care about? So this brings people, info on specific bills. It notes the request to speak system. And then at the bottom, we included a link to how to get a COVID vaccination. So we're really trying, I was trying at the time to just think of how can we help link people to information that might not otherwise be easily accessible. To somebody who's not, I'm kind of a political nerd and I love following this stuff, but I realize that for most people, they have lots of other things they'd rather spend time doing. So that's one example. I'm trying to think if we did most of the outreach we did was during the legislative session. So there was kind of a natural set of topics, but I know we did one early on that the Reed Park Zoo expansion was really controversial in our neighborhood. We're really close to Reed Park. And so linking people to what was happening around the Reed Park expansion, around that discussion, that was really, I think, helpful. So just trying to give people kind of a sense of what was going on around them. And I did, Robert, you asked if the news is dated, and I did start later on putting a date on the newsletter because I found that it was confusing both for me and for other people. But every time we went out, especially during the legislative session, when information was changing, the activity was changing constantly, we would update this a day or two before we went out every single time. So we were constantly updating this. But it was a nice format. And again, I used this exact same font, the format, everything looked the same every time we did this, because I want people to know, oh, that's what this is. And maybe half of them throw it out, and that's fine. But the people who are trying to engage, I just want it to be a familiar source of information. Here's a bunch of, this is a second newsletter that I did. This one was focused on LD11, where we were really trying to flip one of the legislative seats there. But you see on the right-hand side is where I identified the specific judges that would appear on their ballot to try to give them, really specific information that they could use when they go, when they actually fill out that ballot. We were trying to make sure, instead of voting for 2 reps in LD11, we wanted them to vote for only 1 to try to get Felipe Perez over the top. Anyway, so I tried to make this as specific as possible. And I admit that this is really text dense, but I don't know, I think for the people who are perhaps going to engage, giving them a lot could be good. I'll show you the postcards here in a minute, which are there's a lot less to them. There's a lot less text there, which may work better for some people. So this is a series of postcards that I did. This again is in our precinct. Just trying to make it personal. This one up on the other upper left is a person who had just turned 18, clearly voting for the first time. So trying to just personalize it a little bit, trying to give some context to why it's important to vote. We were trying to they weren't signed up for PEVL, so trying the permanent early voter list. So we were trying to sort of nudge people in that direction. I think the other one, I guess just trying to be as specific as possible. On the bottom, this one that says, "Hi, Judith." If you look at the very bottom, I tried to say as much as possible, you get your ballot turned in, you're going to stop getting political calls. So again, this is about providing value to the voter, finding things that are maybe like, oh, that's an insight I didn't realize. If I get my ballot in, I'm going to stop getting all these annoying phone calls. So this is something that's helpful because ultimately people don't want to get constant phone calls and texts and knocks on the door and whatever. So here's a way, secret, tool for you to just turn in your ballot and move on with your life. So, you know, in the bottom one, I just did bullets. So trying to make it super, super simple so people can just read right through it. And then finally, this is one that was delivered to a voter who had not yet voted. She was on the permanent early voter list, had not yet voted as of either the day before the election or election day. And so I was in this desperate sort of, here's what you need. Here's, you know, tried to give her the most basic information that she needed to get out and vote. So those are just the ideas. This was cathartic for me to just write these postcards, you know, and I hope they were helpful to some people, but just try to lay it out in this very, very basic way. And I'm going to kind of reiterate this, but focusing on that value, focusing on consistency, and then respecting the fact that not everybody wants to talk about this all the time. They have a million other things going on. And so I think if we keep those things in mind, we can be a great resource for people. This isn't a critical, you don't have to, but I often, if I needed signatures on a petition, I would try to give people a heads up and just say, hey, I'm going to be walking around the neighborhood a Saturday morning. If you don't want to talk to me, don't answer the door. If you do, great. And so just try to respect, again, you know, they got kids running around, or they got whatever they're doing. So that's one thing. Focusing on stuff that's hard for people to find. Judges, before I found the Gavel Watch, it was so frustrating to me to try to find information on which judges to support or not. So giving people that info, info on propositions. I mean, local level propositions are often, they're hard to figure out for people, or they may not be familiar. And then all those down ballot candidates. So trying to get people to vote all the way down. Variety of outreach, being creative in how you do it. And then since you're the same, it's the same person doing this contact over and over again, I think these low intensity touches can be effective, just to kind of keep your name there and keep them thinking about stuff. This puts you in the position to be kind of eyes and ears of the party, of campaigns, of issues, of, you know, the people who govern the city. So trying to be aware of what those neighborhoods are struggling with, or what those families are struggling with, and helping us understand how we can actually provide value again to our residents. And then I know when Marcy and I were walking around delivering our newsletters, we would note if we saw a Black Lives Matter sign, or, you know, some sign that seemed to indicate that folks in that household that might just have independent voters might kind of be leaning in the direction that we want. And then finally, taking risks. I feel like, especially if you're doing a canvas or a phone bank with a script, if you're most comfortable sticking with the script, that's great, it's fine. But I find I have the most interesting conversations when I get totally away from the script and I get in this groove of sort of talking to people in a way that reflects my personality, it reflects what's important to me. And I worry less about whether I'm framing things in the way that's going to appeal to 100, you know, the greatest number of people. And I focus more on engaging with people in maybe a smaller number of people in a really meaningful way. And that's a tough, it's a little bit tough to know. I kind of understand that, especially during election time, people are hearing so much from so many people, or from so many volunteers, that it's just, I think, can be really helpful to just let them know you're a human being. So being really honest about why you're motivated, or you know, using the words you might use with a friend to without curse words, of course, but using the words you might use with a friend to express your frustration, letting that personality come through. This is a postcard I wrote. This was my last ditch effort to try to get some people who had not voted their early ballot. And I sort of embraced being a little bit ridiculous. And yeah, there's a chance that this isn't going to resonate with 60% of voters, but maybe it'll resonate with a couple of people who may not, you know, who may be so tired of this information, so tired of thinking about the election. Maybe it'll just resonate with them in a little bit different way because it communicates in a way that they're not seeing anywhere else. So I kind of took a chance on some of this, just because I wanted this, I wanted to see what could happen. Any questions about that? I know I'm kind of going through this. So let me talk to, and we just have a couple more slides, but I want to talk specifically about independence in Arizona because it is a really big percentage of our electorate. This is a breakdown of what how our voters identify themselves. And you can kind of see that over time, the percentage of left-leaning independents is increasing. And I think this is a very significant reason why Arizona is starting to lean left. That's probably a strong way to put it. Why it's starting to lean purple. So we are seeing these left-leaning independents grow. But so I think it's really important that we get in this mindset of trying to talk to those folks as much as possible. So just some basics about who independents are. They certainly don't necessarily identify with one party or the other. They may be deeply suspicious of our political system, of the way parties operate. They may be distrustful of politicians, just feel like nothing ever changes. I was surprised to learn that they tend to be younger, although in some ways, there's a level of cynicism involved with sort of looking at how my generation and previous generations have handled the world that, may make them feel like there's not a whole lot of, difference. And then they kind of don't like to be bothered about this stuff. But these are things we have to keep in mind. And again, sort of driving people to talk about issues, understanding the things that affect them, understanding the issues that concern them. I think all of that is so important in being able to talk to all the types of people we need to talk to. So to start on this, it really getting a list for your neighborhood is really important. Larry pointed out that it may be the LD that may make most sense, and I'll let others address the sort of specifics of that at the end of this. But getting that voter list, and TAG usually, the Arizona Ground Game usually uses 40 to 60 voters per person. If that sounds absolutely daunting to you, you can certainly adopt a list with a partner or something like that, and sort of tackle it at the level you feel like you can take on. So there's a couple of immediate ways to start this. So no reason to wait for an election. There is the city election ballot chase that is happening immediately, basically. But that's a very nice reason to sort of go out, introduce yourself, say, this is who I am, this is how I'm involved. I, want to be a resource for you, whatever you feel comfortable with. And I have a sample of a sort of short blurb that I did. And we've got a couple of others. And then the petitions, like I mentioned, being able to give people a reason to talk to you, saying this is something very real and impactful that we can do right now. That's a really nice way to just start this conversation. And this is, one of the touches that you'll endeavor to take over the next year. Like I mentioned, finding a buddy, either to adopt a list together or like Marcy and I have done, to sort of try to up the amount of conversation happening in our precinct. That can be really powerful. Doing that introduction, so even if it's the ballot chase, if it's something else, starting with an introduction, so you're sort of taking a different approach than just an in and out volunteer will take. I'm going to actually tell you who I am and that I live near you, and this is why I think this is important. And you can start to build that actual relationship. And then we want to start sharing information. So the newsletters I showed you, the postcard examples, all that stuff we can make available on a shared drive or in some other way so that people can sort of share ideas. And if you find that, I don't know, you did a litter cleanup in your neighborhood and you found like that really, felt like that really engaged people, whatever it is, we want to sort of share those ideas and make this something that we do together. And I'm almost done here, but you are focused on not just getting people to vote in a specific election, but to try to understand them, to provide value to them, and to help them find solutions to things that, you know, you learn may be a challenge that they're facing. I also think it's important to keep in mind, I can't remember the exact percentages, but when you do internet advertising, something like a 1 or 2% click rate, you know, somebody clicks on whatever you are advertising on the internet, if 1 or 2% of the targeted audience clicks it, that's a victory. And I feel like voter outreach to some extent is the same thing. So what feels like a whole bunch of rejections and just a couple of positive conversations, that's really, really important, because all of this adds up. So what you do on your street or in your neighborhood adds to what I do in mine, and what happens in your precinct or your LD as a whole. And I think that's just so important to keep in mind, that all of those conversations add up to something that shifts the state and shifts the LD and shifts the, you know, presidency, all of these things. So I think it's important to keep in mind and not get discouraged if you only hear back from a tiny percentage of your voters or whatever that is. So I think that's really important. Again, the idea is to develop a network of people who are all working together on this and kind of supporting each other with ideas. And again, back to this point that I really enjoy canvassing now, because I've been up and down those streets several times. I've talked to certain people more than once, and I really enjoy, I get so much more out of it than in 2018 when I was walking in these neighborhoods that I've never been in before. So I just want to say there's a lot of positivity here. Let me see. There's our contact info. Let's see. Oh, thanks, Rhoda. That's very helpful. And then David asked about, or David's iPad rather asked, what do you recommend on going in pairs versus alone? Great question. We always, Marcy and I always go together. We are usually on the opposite side of the street, but that's largely been because during COVID, we really haven't been doing a ton of door knocking. So when we are actually knocking on doors, I have a feeling we may go in pairs door to door. But we'll I don't know, we'll have to figure that out, and it may depend on what we're working on. And I don't know, Marcy and I are both women, and I haven't felt unsafe or concerned about doing that. And I ultimately think you'll know your area, you know, you'll get to know your area well enough that you'll figure out whether you feel comfortable doing that or not. And I think ultimately you need to feel comfortable with whatever type of outreach you do. That is all I have. So I'd be very happy to take more questions, or if there's a discussion, anybody want to kind of jump in with thoughts or questions?
Do we want to go ahead and let Marcy do the canvassing during COVID, just the safety, and
Yes.
get that covered for sure?
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry about that, Marcy.
Yeah, no problem. You know, as Jackie said before, when we went out canvassing, we were very conscious about COVID. So we weren't door knocking, we were leaving our information. But at this point, we do feel strongly we can be very safe and canvass knocking on doors. And if you look at the main ways that we all stay safe during COVID, no matter what you're doing, whether you're canvassing or you're going to the grocery store, it's number one, outside is safer than inside. Now we know it's all about ventilation. So the better ventilated area you're in, the safer you are. Well, this is an all outdoor activity, canvassing. So that's great. Second is to wear a mask that covers your nose and your mouth, and we'll be going out wearing the mask. So again, that feature is covered. Maintaining a distance of 6 to 8 feet. That's very easy to do when you're canvassing. We're going to knock on the door, ring the doorbell, and step back right away. So all these features, we feel that we can easily incorporate them into a very COVID safe activity. So whereas before we did not directly canvas. And that showed, we think, in the election results. So now it's time to step up and do that. And I do feel absolutely we can do that safely, both for ourselves and for the people we're canvassing. Okay. Are any
Right.
questions with COVID related?
Or, our time is kind of winding down, so we will not be going into breakout rooms. So go ahead and ask some questions, because I'm sure some of you have other things that you've been thinking about, but you just haven't put in chat. So you want to just raise your hand or speak out and ask your question.
Susan's got her hand up. You can go ahead, Susan.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm wondering if the volunteers are covering their costs of, printing and postage themselves, or if you're getting help from your LD, or how that works.
It's a great question. We have just been doing our own, but certainly, I don't know, Diane, do you have a thought on that, or Larry?
Well, during the past year, the LD did pay for some mailings, and then other times people have paid for their own. So, we've done it both ways. Larry, do
Larry,
you
you
want-
have your hand up? I don't know if Larry has that answer to that question, or if
No, I had my hand up for a separate reason, but
okay.
Diane hit it on the head. People have done it both ways.
okay. Yeah, and I think it's up to you. Larry, go ahead with your question.
My question was, do you ever use texting as a complement to going out knocking on doors? For example, would you text people that you're going to go out to?
That is a good question. I have tended to, if I'm calling, I will usually follow up with a text if I don't get an answer. In part because I so much prefer texting myself to listening to a voicemail. I think when I've done outreach leading up to the election, especially, I would maybe not immediately follow up with a text or lead to a door knock with a text, but I would try to follow up fairly quickly if it was. My approach with the election was to let all the 4x4s, those high efficacy voters, vote. Just let them. I wouldn't touch them at all early in the cycle, and I would, start to do these touches, either texts or postcards or whatever, with the people who don't tend to vote as consistently, and then I would gradually up the contacts with the 4x4 voters who hadn't voted yet. So I don't know. I kind of varied my approach a little bit, and I guess, yeah, we'll have to think a little bit about how we're doing it now that I think we will be door knocking again, where I kind of like the idea of following up. Hey, I knocked on your door today, or I'm going to be knocking on your door in a couple of days. I think that's great.
Thank you.
Dan has his hand up.
Yeah, so you mentioned that getting voter lists, we would contact our district leadership, I guess. Is that the same thing as far as getting lists of volunteers that we might be able to contact? Because I imagine that's for me, the first step is to get the voter lists and maybe lists of volunteers to try and start organizing stuff.
That's a great question. I don't know, Mike, or I don't know, somebody want to address that? Who handles the data?
Excuse me. Your LD leadership, or in some cases, I know within LD10, we have different data contacts for different portions of the LD. But anyone who has access to the van can produce the lists, really cut
So like a
based on the
field lead or
criteria that
something?
you're looking for. I'm sorry, what?
Like a field lead or something like that? Or
What
I'm not
LD
sure
are
what we
you in?
call them.
What LD are you in?
I'm in 10.
In 10? Okay, so
Yeah.
yeah, you should be able to contact your territory lead,
Territory
And-
lead.
and they should be able to help you with that. And
Okay.
actually, you can email me if you have trouble figuring out, how that works and so on, and we can get you linked
Okay.
up.
I know
But-
who my TL is.
Okay, but in general, what we've tried to do is, when I worked with Jackie early on, I was producing a list of really all the voters in the precinct that she was interested in. And we could cut it several different ways. We could say, okay, you show me all the Democrats, or show me all the Democrats and independents, or show me everybody. The other thing that you can do, though, is that you can, if you're primarily interested in trying to recruit people to be volunteers, I would focus on just a more selective list of people who are solid Democrats, who are maybe those 4x4 voters that indicate that they're engaged already in the political process, and try to look for the folks who would be more likely to be engaged and interested. And that becomes a more concentrated, more selective list that is probably a higher potential of finding people who would be interested in working with you. So from a data standpoint, that's how I would approach it. And Jackie, you probably have.
I was just going to add that all the LDs maybe, but I know LD10 has a list of people who have volunteered in the past, or who are PCs, all of that stuff. So that is something we can produce, and maybe all the other LDs have that too. I don't know.
Right.
And Eric did ask about PCs as a potential contact, and I think some PCs are super active, some are not very active, and that's where starting with the territory leads is ideal. Or if you don't know who your territory lead is, reach out to your LD and try to figure out who a good person to start with would be. But if you aren't sure who to reach out to, I put my email in the chat, and I'm sure anyone on this call would be happy to help you figure out who the right person is.
I know who to contact now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just
Dan-
for everybody else, LD10 is the only one with territory leads. Everybody else, they just have precinct leads or precinct captains. But, depending on where you are, you could always start with the chair of your LD to, say, I want to do this and this, and, who do I contact to do that? They would certainly put you in the right direction of what to do.
And Mr. Green Valley Democrat, I see your hand is up.
I was just going to remark, like Diane was just saying, many of the LDs do not have territorial leads. And so the best resource is your chair. We are going to be part of the training team and that we're working on is band training. And so down the road, we will let the chairs know when that training is becoming available, because you should have somebody, maybe numerous people in your LD as someone that can cut lists. And so, we're working on that, and hopefully sooner than later, we will have that available.
That's great.
And another resource might is your legislators. I know in our particular case, we have ours sends out a newsletter. And so you can get a lot of good information monthly from your legislators. And then also put a plug in for PCDP. Their website has lots of good information, and it's kind of ongoing. So if you're looking for some general information, there's a couple good resources.
That's great. And a couple of good comments in the chat about LD9 that had a target group of voters they were reaching out, and it sounds like they split them up among a group. I don't know, Mary, if you want to make more comments on that, please do. And then Miranda put a link to canvassing that's starting next weekend. So I know 2022 the election feels really far off, but I think if we really want to focus on, this relationship-based voting, it's such a good time to start. It doesn't feel like you're just showing up out of convenience at the last second. And this gives you a chance to sort of start with that city election if you're in Tucson, start with, some really basic topics before, next September, when they're going to be getting calls from, people everywhere all over the country. And Larry, you have your hand up.
Yes, I was just going to say to Dan, he would need to go to his territory lead to get a list. But another way to get volunteers is, if you've got a good friend that you talk to politics about, get that person to go canvassing with you. I mean, you get them to go canvassing with you, they'll maybe want to go off on their own, and they've got two groups. So that's a good place to start. And this is all relationship based, and that's the first place to start.
And so we have had, Marcy and I have had some good luck finding a couple of people in our precinct who I don't know that they're ready to adopt a full list of 50 people, but they've been willing to come out with us on a certain Saturday and help us take info around. And I think if you find somebody who cannot imagine taking more than 10 voters, give them 10 voters. I'm like, figure out where they are, figure out what they feel like they can take on. And if you give them 10 voters that their job is to reach those people 3 times a year, maybe that sounds doable. And I feel like that's okay to reach people where they are. Elizabeth and then Mike. Oops, and Elizabeth, you're muted.
What is the Canvassing Weekly? I can look it up, but what's that about?
So every week we are going to be hosting canvasses for the Tucson city election. So we'll be going out to different areas to knock on doors and remind people to send their ballots in. We're just not going to be including LD10 because they're doing their own thing. We also won't be including LD11 because they do not fall within the Tucson city limits.
Okay. Thank you.
Mike, you had a comment or a question?
Yeah, I was going to reinforce something that you were talking about just a second ago, Jackie, which is, and Larry as well, the idea of getting a friend or somebody to go along with you canvassing. A really great way to do it is just to have them be your partner and let them shadow you. Tell them up front, I'll do the talking. You can just kind of shadow and just kind of get a sense as to what this is like. It kind of takes the pressure off of them. And a lot of times they're interested. They're curious as to what the dynamics are going to be, but they sure don't want to be thrust into the seat right away. And what you find is after maybe 10 houses or so, they start feeling like, well, I can do this. And then you can flip the roles and have them do a little bit of talking and you shadow them a little bit. And by the end of a day, an afternoon of doing that, you may find yourself with a volunteer who feels a lot more comfortable rather than having just been thrown into the soup by themselves initially.
Yeah. Yep. And I don't, Diane, when do we need to stop talking?
Well, our time is up, but
Okay.
we can keep rolling a few more minutes if y'all have more things you want to say.
Okay. Well, I just wanted, Eric did post, asked if there was a buddy list. And I think that, Eric, what LD are you in?
I'm LD2.
You're two. Okay. And I don't know as much about LD2, but we certainly can connect you with the LD leads, right? And they may have a list of volunteers that have been active before. So that would be one starting point.
I was wondering if you'd systematized it. When you were relating your story, Jackie, one of the most powerful things was your personal transformation because of your connection, with, somebody and how that transformed it. I think we should leverage that, frankly, as much as we can. So I'm beating the horse. I know I'm preaching to the choir.
No, but I love it though. I think it is so important. And I think part of it is, when I think about how much I enjoy canvassing now versus when I was canvassing in random places, it makes it complete. And I enjoy it. I like doing it. We schedule a weekend every 2-3 weeks during the election.
Sure.
We schedule a morning that we just went out and did our thing. So it made it fun.
The spirit of corps is a thing, not just French.
Yeah.
Yeah, Larry, this is Matthew Boyd. I'm the first vice chair in LD2. I will contact you and answer any questions you have about how we're going to be getting started.
Perfect. That's so great. And Mary added some more notes on her outreach in LD9. But I think the point is they work together. They split it up into sort of bite-sized chunks and tackled, this voter outreach. And I do think that makes such a difference to have it in this. It's something you feel like you're assigned and you feel like it's your, those are the folks your job is to reach out to. Elizabeth, your hand is still up. Did you have? Okay. Anybody else? Oh, Mike, go ahead.
One thing which I wanted to mention, Jackie, you had mentioned that you were starting to either do or think about putting your own notes into the van. And one thing which I have learned is that when something goes into the notes in the van, that stays with that voter forever. And it also prints out when you do a general standard call list or canvas list. So when you put your notes in the van, be thinking that this is something that other people are going to be reading. This is not just your personal notes. And it's going to be
Great
something
point.
that will print out regularly for when a call list is generated and that person is on it. So
That's really
job.
helpful, Mike. And I was mostly thinking that would be where, oh, I dropped off a newsletter, or I, more tracking the when I reached out. But is there a place you would, I mean, is it, if you're going to make notes on, I had a conversation with Mike about XYZ, is that really, you just have to do that in your own document?
I think that's what I would do. I don't know of any
Okay.
place in the van that is your private writing place.
Okay.
So I would probably keep my own little, Word document or Excel spreadsheet.
Okay, thank you. That's a really good clarification. So thank you. I like the
All
note.
right, everybody. Is there anything else we want to talk about before we say goodnight? I tell you, Jackie and Marcy, thank you so very, very, very much. This was quite enlightening.
I am so glad it could be helpful. And I was going to say, I'll work with Larry and Diane to just figure out where we can put stuff for people to look at it, including this, the slides and whatever, if that would be helpful. But
Yes.
I'll work with you guys to figure out where that should go.
Yeah, I think we can all aspire to adopt certain voters that they become ours, and then we really get to know them. And it takes a lot of people to do that, though. One person can't adopt a whole precinct. So you do need to gather more people to do this with you, but it's a wonderful relationship building activity for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for inviting us to come.
Well, thank you. Thank
great.
you.
Extremely well done. Thank
Great
you.
job.
See y'all
Lots of good
later.
Thank
information.
you.
Bye. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.